Is Christianity the white man's religion? Now, before you shut this video off and you ask yourself, what kind of a stupid question is that? I really want to encourage you to watch this video, because if you are at all interested in being what's called missional or on mission for the Lord Jesus Christ, it means that it is critical for you to be able to understand and share your faith with people who may not look like you, who may come from a different background. So it's important, if you come across somebody who is black, who actually believes that Christianity is the white man's religion, they have been brainwashed into believing that. It's critical, if you want to be an ambassador for Christ that is being used to reach people outside of yourself, you need to know why they believe that, as well as some reasons and some arguments that you can possibly share with this person to help them understand that Christianity is not the white man's religion. So, in this video, I want to give you 3 primary reasons why many black people, hopefully no black Christians, and certainly not Alan Parr, okay, so just be clear, this is not Alan Parr's perspective. I'm merely sharing with you what some of the cult groups are trying to teach some of our black brothers and sisters about Christianity. I'm going to give you 3 of their main arguments. So once again, the reason why this video is critical is because there are cult groups like the Hebrew Israelites and also the Nation of Islam and a host of other groups that are trying to brainwash young black people to believing that they need to leave Christianity because it's the white man's religion. So here are the top 3 reasons, once again, none of them actually having any real validity whatsoever. Reason number 1 is due to the mistreatment of African people by white slave owners. So the concept of Christianity being the white man's religion emerged primarily out of the slavery days, which was a time period in my country, in the United States, which basically was around 1619 or so, all the way through 1865. It was a dark time in our country, and I would say that whether you're white, black, Asian, or whoever, you would agree that this was a dark period in our history, but it is in our history nonetheless. Now, sadly, during this time, you had a lot of white Christian slave owners that actually tried to use the Bible to justify not only owning slaves, but mistreating slaves as well. Some of the verses would be verses like Ephesians 6:5, which says, "Slaves, obey your human masters with fear and trembling in the sincerity of your heart, as you would Christ." And then looking at other verses that they would rip completely out of context and misappropriate, perfect example being Exodus chapter 21. And it says this, "When a man strikes his slave, male or female, with a rod, and the slave dies under his hand, he shall be avenged," meaning the slave shall be avenged. "But if the slave survives a day or 2, he is not to be avenged, for the slave is his money." So on the surface, and we're not going to get into the interpretation of this verse, but on the surface, it sounds like, okay, if you kill your slave, then you know what, you should be punished. But if you just beat him to the point of death, then as long as he recovers, you'll be okay. So they would use these types of scriptures to justify slavery. Now, conveniently, many of these same white Christian slave owners would leave out verses that talked about the penalties or the prohibitions for kidnapping, which is also in the same chapter. Notice it says this, "Kidnappers must be put to death, whether they are caught in possession of their victims or have already sold them as slaves." Now, just to provide a little bit of clarity, the slavery that was experienced in the Bible was very, very different than the slavery that we saw in the United States on many levels. First and foremost, most of the time, it was what's called indentured servitude, or somebody who could not pay off a debt. They were in serious trouble, and so because they didn't have the money to pay it back, they could work it off. But even in that, the Bible set up a system where, so that somebody wouldn't remain a slave forever, every 6 years, that slave was supposed to be released. Now, at the risk of turning this into a history lesson, many of the same white Christian slave owners would prohibit or keep some of those black slaves from reading or learning the Bible or being taught portions of the Bible in fear that if they saw what the Bible really said about slavery, then they would get courage to actually go for their liberation or try to get free. And so in order to maintain control, they would purposely not allow slaves to learn certain portions of the Bible. So if you can just imagine from a black person's perspective, someone from another cult may say to a black man or a black woman, hey, why on earth would you want to be a part of the Christian faith that encourages and condones slavery in their own Bible? Now, the second reason why many cult groups are trying to brainwash many African Americans to believe that Christianity is the white man's religion, once again, none of these have any validity to them, is the fact that they believe that Christianity paints the picture of a whitewashed Jesus. Now, I'm just going to say straight up, for me, I don't care what color Jesus was. I don't care if he was white. I don't care if he was black. I don't care if he was brown. Like, it doesn't matter to me. His blood was red. He shed his blood on the cross for me. But that's just me, right? But for others who really need to believe that Jesus was one color or the other, this is a big issue. Now, the idea that Jesus was a white man was further popularized by a guy by the name of Warner Salmon, who in 1940 painted this picture of Jesus, which portrayed Jesus as being a white man who had blonde hair and blue eyes. And this probably was one of the paintings that you may have had hanging up in your house growing up. It was so popular that it even made its way into black Baptist churches as well. Go figure that out. So what some of the opponents of Christianity will say, who are trying to convince people that Christianity is the white man's religion, is that, hey, if Jesus is white and you can't really trust white people, well, then therefore you can't trust Jesus either. Or on the flip side, if we can make Jesus black, then we can say that Jesus identifies with those who are marginalized. Jesus identifies with those who are oppressed, and so therefore you can trust him. Do you see the ridiculous fallacy in that type of thinking? The reality is that Jesus died on the cross, regardless of what color he is, and he experienced excruciating, humiliating pain on our behalf. So no matter what color he is able to identify with those who have been oppressed, those who have been mistreated, and those who have been humiliated, once again, regardless of what color he is. Now, with all that being said, I think that it is important, if we're ever going to sketch a picture of Jesus, which I don't quite understand why people do that anymore, because at the end of the day, we don't know what color he is. But I think it is important that we do our best to portray Jesus in the most accurate light, considering that he was from the Middle East and he was a Jew. Now, reason number 3 is another very strong one that people will use to claim that Christianity is the white man's religion, and that is the fact that the church seemed to be apathetic towards the oppression of African American people. Let me explain. So not only did it seem on the surface that the church was complicit, or at the very least apathetic, during the slavery days, but then following slavery, we had this period called the Jim Crow time, where black people were not permitted to vote. They were not able to sit at certain places on the bus. They had to drink from certain water fountains. They had to go to different bathrooms. They were not permitted to bear arms. They were not permitted to purchase land, and all sorts of different rules that we all know about at this time, called the Jim Crow rules. And so the idea was that, hey, even though the church may not have been trying to lead a parade to say, hey, segregation is good, on the surface, it didn't seem as though the church was actively trying to fight against segregation during this time. It was more of a neutral perspective. And so many people will say, well, hey, slavery is over, but yet you don't see the church fighting on the front lines. Now, individual Christians were of all colors, maybe were fighting for civil rights on an individual basis, but a lot of times you didn't see the church at large take a stand and say, okay, we are going to be the main force that is going to fight for eradicating segregation. And so once again, many opponents of Christianity, once again, not Alan Parr, because I can hear some of y'all getting upset about this very video, not me, but opponents of Christianity will say, hey, why on earth would you want to be associated with a religion that didn't even care, didn't even fight for you whenever you were being mistreated, when you were being oppressed, whenever you were being lynched, and all these different things. So now that you understand the three major reasons why somebody may assert that Christianity is the white man's religion, let's now talk about some things that you may be able to say in order to hopefully convince somebody that it is not the white man's religion, that Jesus Christ came to die for all, and Christianity is a religion for all people, no matter race or color. So the first thing that you're going to want to help get this person to understand is the fallacy in painting a broad brush. So in other words, help them understand that you never want to characterize any sort of church or organization or company or religion by the worst people in that particular group. If that was the case, then there wouldn't be a company, there wouldn't be a church, there wouldn't be an organization, there wouldn't be a religion in the world that you would say is good, because if you judged every one of those groups by the people that are the worst in it, then you're always going to come to the conclusion that that particular group is evil. So you have to help them understand that it is wrong to take a few people throughout the history of Christianity, a small subset of Christians, and say because these people were evil in nature, then that means that the whole religion in and of itself has got to be evil as well. Now, another thing that you're going to want to do is help them understand the history and the contributions of African people to Christianity. Why is this important? Because for many Black people, they need what's called representation. In other words, they need to be able to see that someone like them has contributed positively in this particular organization. And so if that is the case, then maybe it's not that bad. They also need to understand that Christianity extended far back, much further back than slavery. First Christians didn't start during slavery times. Christianity existed far beyond that. So we want to help them understand that many of the most famous church fathers who contributed significantly to our theological beliefs today were from places in Africa. People like Tertullian, people like Athanasius, people like Origen, people like Augustine, one of the great church fathers. And even tradition believes that Mark, who wrote the Gospel of Mark, the first gospel, had his roots and origins from a place in North Africa as well. And so the last thing that I will leave you with today is a quote by a man by the name of Frederick Douglass, who himself was enslaved at the hands of a white slave owner. And so I want you to understand his perspective about the Christian faith, even though he himself experienced mistreatment. And so he writes this in his autobiography, and I really want you to grasp the sense and the essence of what he is saying. He says, "I have in several instances spoken in such a tone and manner respecting religion as may possibly lead those unacquainted with my religious views to suppose me an opponent of all religion." So Frederick starts off by saying, hey, maybe in the past I've spoken about my faith and my Christianity in a way that might have given people the wrong impression about what I believe about my own faith. Now let's keep going. To remove the liability of such misapprehension, I deem it proper to append the following brief explanation. What I have said respecting and against religion, I mean strictly to apply to the slave-holding religion of this land, and with no possible reference to Christianity proper. For between the Christianity of this land and the Christianity of Christ, I recognize the widest possible difference. So wide that to receive the one as good, pure, and holy is of necessity to reject the other as bad, corrupt, and wicked. To be the friend of the one is of necessity to be the enemy of the other. I love the pure, peaceable, and impartial Christianity of Christ. I therefore hate the corrupt, slave-holding, woman-whipping, cradle-plundering, partial, and hypocritical Christianity of this land. Indeed, I can see no reason but the most deceitful one for calling the religion of this land Christianity. I look upon it as the climax of all misnomers, the boldest of all frauds, and the grossest of all libels. You see, even a slave like Frederick Douglass was able to make the distinction between the Christianity that was founded by Jesus Christ, who loves everyone dearly and wants the equality of all people, no matter what color, no matter what race you are. He was able to draw a distinction between the heart of Christianity and the evil form of Christianity that was being experienced in the times of slavery. And my friend, hopefully, if you are out there and you are being brainwashed into thinking that Christianity is some sort of white man's religion, that you will hopefully understand that Christianity extends far beyond the slave days, and that Jesus Christ can identify with you no matter what color you are, because he was mistreated, he was humiliated, he was bruised, he was broken for our iniquities. And no matter what you've done, Jesus loves you. He can identify with whatever you're doing. He was tempted and tried in all things, and yet without sin. So, is Christianity the white man's religion? Absolutely not. Hopefully that clears up this issue and lays it to rest. And I hope that if you, for whatever reason in your life, you may come across somebody who is convinced of this, that you'll hopefully have this video in your mind and you will be a missional Christian, now being available to reach people outside of yourself who may have been taught things that are not proper, because you now have a different perspective. If you found this video helpful in any way, feel free to share it with a friend. Also, if you haven't done so already, I would love it if you would subscribe. Check out some of the other videos on this channel. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time on The Beat.